Hello everyone, and my name's Yann Toussaint, and I'd like to talk to you about community gardens and why they matter. I'm the community gardener at the Rainbow Coast Neighbourhood Centre Community Garden, which is in Mount Lockyer, but everybody is welcome. There's a few things I'd like to talk to you about community gardens and their importance. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that we're standing on Noongar ground, and I'd like to, as does the community garden, and I'd like to pay my respects to those elders past, present and future, and just acknowledge the fact that the Noongar people of this country have managed what, to paraphrase Bill Gammage, might be regarded as the largest community garden on earth. So we've got a lot to learn, but some of the principles perhaps hold true as to why gardening is so important for community. So growing together, why community gardens matter. As I say, we're from the Rainbow Coast Neighbourhood Centre Community Garden, which is located in Mount Lockyer. Sowing the seed. We started the community garden more than 10 years ago. It's had to shift locations. And it started with an idea that it would be really important for children particularly to have a place where they could learn about gardening and about the joy of gardening, and to have a sense of where their food comes from. So it's a place where we run lots of kids' workshops. We have a program called the Garden Grubs, which is aimed for 7 to 12-year-olds, and really important for people to learn where their food comes from, and as a place to tell these sorts of intergenerational stories as well. So what things were like when they grew up, how they perhaps shelled peas with their grandparents and so on, to make things real. So in this case, we're talking about magic beans, the scarlet runner beans, and just show people the beauty of seeds and of plants as well. Apart from growing an appreciation of gardening amongst children, one of the key things I think that the community garden can help us achieve is growing diversity, both of the foods that we eat, but also of the people that we meet as well. So we've been incredibly fortunate at Rainbow Coast in that we work closely with the Albany and Katanning Migrant Resource Centres. So we've had people like this Korean woman from Myanmar, and I'll show you some examples of gardening projects we've done in Katanning as well, where we've had the pleasure of working with people from diverse communities, learning about the crops that are important to them, learning about different gardening techniques as well. And we've had the option of teaching them too, perhaps some things that we've come to understand about how crops that they might be familiar with in Myanmar or Burundi, have the gardening practices have to change slightly perhaps when you come to WA. So it's been a really interesting cultural exchange, lots of story sharing, lots of food sharing. It's been a real privilege. And so one of the stories I'd like to suggest to you, perhaps as a way of exemplifying some of the strengths of a community garden approach, is a story based in Katanning. Now, a few years ago, some of the recently arrived families from Burundi, Twa people from Burundi, had been settled in Katanning, and they were enthusiastically growing things in their gardens, as this woman is here. And they were spending a lot of time hand watering. So it came to people's attention when they came to the Migrant Resource Centre with enormous water bills that they couldn't afford to pay. And I got a phone call and said, could I do some water-wise gardening workshops? So I said, yeah, I'd love to come along and meet them. And went and saw a few back gardens, and these were quarter acre, in some cases half acres. The whole back garden had been thoroughly ploughed up, and good use had been made of the sheep manure from the Katanning sale yards. And there were corn plants underplanted with beans and squash, so that three sisters approach, if you like, where the corn provides the structure for the green beans to grow up, and then the squash shades out the soil, keeps it cool and moist. But I looked over some of these fences, and some of the corn later in the season was getting to 10, 12 foot tall. And I thought, well, I can't get sweet corn of those varieties sent to me from the eastern states, let alone seeing them in Western Australia before. So I expressed a degree of concern. I had a chat to some of the women, and they said, oh yes, some friends have sent it to us from camps in Uganda and Burundi, which rang a few alarm bells for me. So I had a chat to a friend of mine who works was in the agriculture department in the biosecurity section, and I said, I wonder if you've noticed this, but I think you might have a little bit of a problem. However, I want to avoid anyone getting in trouble for it if we possibly can. And so he said, well, I'm so glad you've come along. Did you know that I speak fluent Swahili, which I had absolutely no idea of? So he came along, chatted to them in Swahili for over an hour, and we talked about the risks of growing things from seed that has been sent through legally. And at the end of it, he said, well, it's almost ready to harvest. So dry it, grind it up for your potier, for your porridge, burn all the plants, and then he presented them with 5 kilos of seed that he had been allowed to import. So a maize seed that he had been allowed to import. And on the back of that, we developed a really good relationship with the 12 women. And we decided to set up a community garden at the CRC in Katanning. So this is some very early days of setting up a community garden with the help of these women and with the help of the Katanning Gardening Club as well. So again, some really interesting intercultural exchanges and intergenerational exchanges as well. And through that medium of gardening, managed to develop some really strong relationships between people who might not otherwise have met or recognised that they had much in common. And the women who were involved were very proud, and they brought their children along, and sometimes slightly more reluctantly their teenage children as well. And we ended up developing a very, very flourishing garden there, as well as gardening extensively in their homes in ways that observed the conditions that they now found themselves in, so much drier than they were used to in Burundi, and with still a sensitivity to the crops that were important to them, but circumventing some of those potential risks to the agricultural sector as well, through making sure that the seed was sourced appropriately or had gone through quarantine if necessary. So I think this is just a really good example of how community gardens can connect people, connect people who might not otherwise recognise that they had a great deal in common. So one of the other things that we've done in community gardens in Albany as well is just emphasise the sharing of produce as well. So one of our key contributions, I think, to the community becomes a place where we get to host and facilitate a produce swap, where people can bring along excess fruit and vegetables, or excess seedling or seed or recipes or kombucha scobies or sourdough cultures or whatever it might be. And the emphasis is on sharing, but we also recognise that people are at different stages in their home gardens as well. So some people might love gardening and produce an excess of material, an excess of food, excess of cuttings and seedlings for the joy of it, and they're keen to pass that on to people who are just starting and perhaps don't yet have much to share except their incipient enthusiasm. And it's an important site as well for saving seeds as well. So we have a number of projects around seed saving and documenting seed and seed libraries too, because so much of the knowledge that people have about their gardens is literally contained, encoded in the seeds that they've been selecting for over decades in some cases. So we've got bean seeds or garlic varieties or tomato varieties that people have been growing in the Great Southern and choosing the best of them year after year to save and to plant for another generation. And I think that's really, really important. And it's really important for our sustainability and our biosecurity as well, to have control over our seed resources. So we do workshops on saving seeds, as well as emphasising sharing the yield from our gardens and from the community garden as well. We also run a great deal of workshops too, and these are of a range of different topics. So composting and worm farming are a perennial favourite, because starting with the soil, getting the soil right, is incredibly important to make our gardens grow, whether it's the community garden, which is on a fairly sandy site, or in the diversity of soil types that people find in their gardens across the region. We also do workshops, as I said, on seed saving. We do workshops on propagating, on fruit tree care, on pruning, workshops on planting native plants, developing verge gardens, attracting pollinators, native pollinators to our garden, making our gardens hospitable to wildlife as well. So again, this is a really important thing that community gardens are able to do for us, to become a site for education as well. What else do we do? We host regular festivals throughout the year as a way of celebrating and promoting that sort of abundance that comes with a garden. So we invite stallholders, we have demonstrations, we have music, and of course we have food as well. And it's in celebrating food and community that I think community gardens really come into their own. So thank you. Thank you for listening. Grow well. And if you wish to contact us at all, please contact us by phone on 9841 8254 or via email, or you can find us on Facebook as well. Thanks very much.